pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on. If you would just...
Don't.
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I...
Sure, many of you have seen that before. It's always worth a redo. Sometimes we fight about the wrong things, and this morning in James, he's going to talk us about how we fight differently and how we need to fight differently as far as getting into the root of what we're fighting about. Here's the bottom line this morning. Our hearts are at war, and they keep kind of going behind enemy lines on a regular basis. I don't know about you, but my heart is always fighting a war, and it always feels like the safest place for my heart to go is behind enemy lines and not towards Christ. And I wonder why am I feeling this way? And it's because I keep running to the wrong side. And James actually talks a lot about that. And James keeps hammering home the importance of our hearts in James chapter 4. Our hearts, that thing that got smashed as a freshman when your girlfriend told those crushing words to you of we should just be friends, right? That's always fun. That thing that swells with pride when your kid hits the triple or scores the goal, right? It's the thing that swells in me when there's just enough bass in the room that you can feel it in your chest. That makes my heart happy. Others of you, that does not make your heart happy, and you wonder why our church does that sometimes. It's because of me. And so, just so you know, I miss bass. I really do. The thing that swells in me whenever the bass is that the thing that is wonderfully complex about us is our hearts. The thing that can make decisions out of my gut says to do this, right? It comes from our heart. It's a thing that fills up to bursting every time your spouse hugs you. It's still, never gets old. It's the mysterious thing that can cause all of this and yet can be the thing that causes us to go off on the umpire or the referee in a game and wonder, why on earth did you make that call, right? And our heart gets angry as well. It has both sides of it. But really bigger than all these, you need to know that our hearts are the place where relationships happen. Relationships thrive or fall apart at the heart level every single time. And we can sometimes wonder, that sounds really deep, but is that really true? Well, search a lot of your relationships and see if a lot of the things that you're fighting about or the things you are in tension about aren't really something that's happening in you, not really something that's happening outside of you, right? I can think of early on in marriage and all of our fights that we had early on over dishes and cleaning and video games and all those things, right? My wife's a big gamer. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That would be really funny, though. And all these fights that happened early on, and I thought it was the external, right? When really it was the internal things that we're fighting about. And our hearts are the center of every single relationship. Think about this. Your heart is the center of every single relationship with ourselves, with others, and with God, right? We always talk about three circles: their responsibility, my responsibility, God's responsibility. The heart is at the center of all three of those circles. And the heart is part of every single one of those relationships. And so this morning, here's the big question, and you don't have to answer it out loud because that may be awkward, but here's the big question this morning. How's your heart? Not how's your actions, not how's your calendar doing, not how's your summer looking. How's your heart? And some of the room are like, finally, we're getting to talk about this. Others in the room are like, I don't even know, man. I didn't even know I had one until you mentioned it, right? I don't have emotions. I don't think that way. I don't know that I really like relationships all that much. Like, you're going to get into this lovey-dovey stuff. Just keep it on the top level shelf, man. I can reach that. Like, let's just not dive into it. But here's the question that James is asking, that we're asking, that I'm asking, and that is, how's your heart? Not your job, not your wife, not your kids, not your retirement plan. How's your heart? Not how's your behavior, which we can modify to save face. We can modify to keep our jobs. We can modify to keep our spouses happy, keep people off our back. We can monitor behavior like crazy. But if we don't ask the question, how's your heart? Eventually, as one pastor said, eventually your heart, the real you, will outpace your attempts to monitor and modify everything you say and do. Let me say that again. Eventually your heart, the real you, eventually over time, give it time, it will outpace your attempts to do two things, to monitor it and modify everything you say and do. Isn't it exhausting to always monitor and modify everything that comes out of your mouth? Some of you don't have that problem and you don't have many friends. I don't never monitor or modify anything. Joel, it just comes right out. And I'm like, I know. We know. We all know, right, that happens. We're asking you to modify a bit, please. Monitor it a little bit, please. But for those of us in the room who monitor and modify all the time, it's exhausting, is it not? Should I say this? Is this going to come out right? Eventually, your heart, the real you, will outpace your attempts to monitor and modify everything you say and do. So the question is, how's your heart? Maybe you've been monitoring it and modifying it for years, and now there's some cracks starting to form, and things are starting to come out. And you're like, I didn't mean it. When in reality, we did mean it. It was just buried deep down, right? I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to come out. I'm sorry. Like, let me rephrase that. It's not that I didn't mean it. I just didn't mean for it to come out, right? The cracks start to come. You can't hide your anger anymore. You can't hide your jealousy anymore. Why does small remarks make me feel like full face punches, right? Why does that thing that used to be cute in my spouse rub me the wrong way all the time, right? Why do people's successes, promotions, vacations cause us immediately to attack them or be skeptical of them? I bet they did something that I don't know. Nobody's that happy. Nobody's that good. You're like, oh, that's a great way to live. We can't celebrate the success of others because there's something happening in our heart. Why does that website I shouldn't visit and I delete from my history folder be the one that I'm drawn to the most? James says it's because our hearts are at war and they keep going and wanting to go behind enemy lines. And so this week, James will tell us that our hearts are at war with ourselves, with others, and with God. James 4:1. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? Let me ask two questions that we know the answer to, but frequently fail the exam, right? You ever have that where you think you're really going to be, you haven't studied because you're like, this exam's going to be so super easy, right? And then you get the piece of paper in front of you and you've never seen it before in your life. And you're like, what is this new thing, right? This may happen, right? These two questions that we know the answer to, we can frequently fail the exam even though we know the answer already ahead of time. Okay, so here's the two questions. Number one, what causes quarrels and fights among you? Passions within me. Correct. But we forget it, right? What causes quarrels and fights among you? We think of your last fight. Think of the last big argument that you got into. And if someone were to ask you, what causes quarrels and fights among you? What is your first reaction to that question? Them, they, those. All of them, right? It, my job, my kids, my schedule, my boss, let me tell you about him, right? Everything is about them and others. It's very easy to quickly go, it's them, or it's very quickly to go, it's me. It's very even quickly to say sometimes we blame it on God. But James is telling us it's that our passions are at war within us. Question 2, is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? He asks two big questions here, right? Question 1 is, what causes quarrels and fights? The second question is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? And I say, yes, James, thanks for bringing that up. Thanks for not letting me put this on somebody else. Thanks for making me deal with my heart this morning. It's what we all wanted to do on June 1st, the start of summer, deal with our hearts. But that is where we find ourselves this morning. And it's a great question because this word passions is important. Passions here is a strong desire, a must-have want. It's stronger than just tempted. This is like, when this passion word is used, it's a, I have to have it, but it's also, I have to have it over a long period of time. It's like you've been thinking about it, wanting it for weeks. You've been dreaming about it for months, right? It's that thing I have to have. It's the passion that he's talking about here. One strong desire I've seen over 25 years of doing ministry is based off of what's called the three-legged stool approach. The greatest passion, desire that I've seen come up year after year in person after person is what's called a three-stool approach. And here's the thing, I learned this in my undergrad at Moody, my sophomore year. And it's funny that learning it as a sophomore in Moody in 1990-something, it hasn't changed. It's still the thing I see in ministry again and again and again. So what is this three-legged stool? The three-legged stool is called the stool of approval. And if you were to see it visually, it looks like this, right? There's three legs that come off of this. And this was actually on, speaking of an exam, this was on an exam for youth ministry that I passed. Approval, right? I remembered this picture. I remembered the three-legged stool. Some of you were thinking I would fail that. I saw that. It's fine. I passed it. Thank you very much. Approval. And there's three legs that come off of this approval stool. And it's identity, belonging, and purpose. And I'm going to tell you that every passion that I've seen in every couple that I've worked with, and every youth student that I've been a part of, every parent that I've talked to, 20-some years of ministry, this hasn't changed. 20-some years of ministry tells me that this is important enough that says our passion, what we truly want, comes out of our identity, belonging, and purpose. And when we don't get identity, belonging, and purpose, we fight to get it. Identity is who am I, belonging is where do I belong, and purpose is what am I here for, right? That's the questions we're asking. And below that, we have to understand that as believers in Christ, we not only have these as part of us as being humans, but we also know that if we're in Christ, we have a different passion. And we have answers to these questions as believers in Jesus Christ. As believers in Jesus Christ, the true thing is, who am I? The answer to that question is simple. If we're a follower of Jesus, we are a child of God, right? Belonging. To answer that question, if we're a believer, we say, I belong to the family that is Jesus Christ. The purpose, what am I here for, gets answered very clearly as believers in Jesus Christ, and the what am I here for is, I'm here to make much of Him, right? And approval, if you take it into these three different areas, sounds good, and there's a lot we could dive into, but let me just kind of stay at the top level here. Approval may sound different from guys and ladies, okay? So approval may sound like this to the dudes in the room. Here's what it sounds like to me anyway. When I think of this desire in my heart that I'm not really getting it what I want, and I'm not sure that my desire is in the right place, here's the question I ask. And I don't know if you're with me or not on this, but here's the question. Do I have what it takes? If I were to boil all of my fights down with my wife and my kids and even those around me, the biggest question at the bottom, if I were to kind of put it as a passion category, as James tells me to, as a guy, I think there's so much in us that's always asking the question, do I have what it takes? And we're never going to admit it freely because who wants to do that? But at the bottom root of a lot of my fights over 20 plus years of marriage, this is at the bottom. Do I have what it takes? And when I feel that that's compromised or that's at risk, I fight because I'm not really sure that I believe that I have what it takes. And instead of going to God to have Him answer the question for me, do I have what it takes? His answer would be, of course you don't. Which sounds so counterintuitive. You're like, wait, that's not what I thought you'd say. When I go to God, I ask Him, do I have what it takes? And He goes, of course you don't. But I do. When I go to my wife or my kids and I ask, I don't ever ask my kids this, that would be weird. But if I were to ask my wife this, she would be, why are you putting yourself through this? And yeah, of course you do. And she's a great help in that. But I'm telling you, at the root of it, it's a big question I deal with every single day. Approval may sound different for the ladies in the room, and I don't mean to be, gender stereotyping this morning, but let's just go there. Ladies in the room, I don't know if it's that as much as your question may be this, and that question is, am I desired? Am I wanted? Am I truly desired? Or am I just here to take care of the kids, do whatever it is, right? Get the job, bring the paycheck home, whatever it is, right? But those two questions are at if we're going to rip the heart apart and kind of sift through, those are the two questions that keep coming to mind when it comes to approval. Do I have what it takes, and am I desired? And our hearts go to war over those two questions, do they not? And they go to war very easily. Like I don't have to rally myself to get the troops going. They know. And we fight well because of those issues. Our hearts are at war, and they keep wanting to go behind enemy lines. And there's a couple reasons that James tells us this is true. Let me just kind of give these to you as James gives them to us in James chapter 4. There's a couple reasons we go to war. And reason number one we go to war is we want what we don't have. To which I love James is so simple and so specific. Reason number one we go to war, we want what we don't have, right? I mean, I started this war when I was like 1, right? I grew into the confidence in this war when I was 2. I started to get really good at it when I was 4, right? Think of every toddler and every child growing up. The reason that they fight and the reason they get angry and the reason they yell at you is because why? They want what they do not have, right? And I'm no different. There's times I want to fight back with them. Have you ever had that moment as a parent where you wanted to fight your toddler? I don't know, that's just me. Like I just like not physically fight, but just like mentally fight. Like I could win this against you. Like my will could topple your will, right? And it's not good because half the time they win. But the will is I want what I want and do not have. James 4:2, you desire and do not have, so you murder, you covet, you cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. We are never content with what we have. We live in a culture that's always changing and telling us that's true. This used to take more time to develop this want, have behavior. But as a culture, we've gotten so quick in this that want and have can become very immediate. It would take years to develop trends in music styles, trends to develop clothing styles, trends to become popular and what's not popular. But now it's instant and it's quick and it moves fast. And instant gratification is as easy as a buy now button on any app that you have. And so it makes perfect sense that we want what we don't have. We've never had to test it because most of us in the room, if we want it, there's not much delayed gratification. There's more of just, I'm going to get it, right? And so James is telling us one of the things we go to war over is we want what we do not have. He says reason number 2 we go to war is we do not have because we do not ask. 4:2. You desire and do not have, so you murder, you covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and you quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. This verse can be taken out of context very easily, so let me explain. Not health and wealth, like kind of prosperity gospel, that's not what we're saying. This is in the context of actually wisdom. This is in the context of knowing the wise thing to do and asking for wisdom. If you go over to James chapter 3, verse 17, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. He says the reason you don't have is because you're asking for the wrong thing. You're asking for just the possession rather than the wisdom behind it. That's reason 2. And then he gives us reason number 3 in verse 3. We go to war because we are asking wrongly. James 4:3, you ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. Again, go back to the passions thing. Go back to the three-legged stool. Go back to the approval. Go back to your questions that I asked originally. Do I have what it takes, and am I desired? He goes, those questions aren't necessarily bad, but if they're stuck in the bottom category of just passions and we don't understand the reason behind them, we don't take them solely to God and say, help me make sense of this passion. He says, you ask and you do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. Selfish ambition or jealousy, or as Michael mentioned last week, achievement, approval, right? Those kind of things that we go after that are things that we ask wrongly for. And then from here, it doesn't get any better. If you follow in the text, it doesn't get any better because then James starts yelling at us, right? And you're like, I already feel bad. I know my heart's not right. I know it's wicked. And then James just goes off. Like, and most pastors would be like, but it's okay, guys. We're going to get through it. Nope. Let me just continue where the pastor goes, okay? Then he starts yelling at us, and he says, pick a side, man. Pick a side, you adulterous people, right? James 4:4, you adulterous people. To which we're like, do you not know the friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. James is so black and white throughout this book, you cannot have it both ways. He goes, you can't be messing around on one side of the camp and think that it's not going to have ramifications on the other side of the camp. You can't drift into enemy territory and think that's not going to have consequences. It's war. And if you keep switching sides based off your feelings in the moment, you're going to end up in trouble. Imagine that scenario in war. Like, imagine if you kept sneaking over to enemy lines and be like, shh, guys, I'm on your side today, right? Right? Or on the other side, like, guys, I really didn't mean it over there. I'm really fighting with you now. That doesn't make any sense, right? In war, it doesn't make any sense. You'd end up dying in some way or be called a traitor in other senses. It's war, and he says it's war in our hearts. And this is our struggle. This is the struggle that James tells us. It is a war within our hearts on these passions. And this is our struggle hourly, daily, throughout our life, in which we say this morning, Community Bible Church, great, thanks Joel, thanks James, this is awesome. This is terrible news. Thanks for telling me that I have desires and lusts inside of me who kill every relationship that I love. Thanks for that. That's awesome. I already knew that. Thanks for telling me that they can even murder. Thanks, that's great. They kill my relationships. Thanks for telling me that if I give in to them, I'm at war with God. Thanks for telling me that if I don't win this war because I'm fighting it the wrong way. Thanks for telling me that this is a lifelong fight and a natural bent. There will be my selfish ambition of jealousy and achieving and all these things. And thanks. That's great. So let's give you some hope this morning. What do you do with all that? What do you do with that? That your heart is messed up and you know it is, and you know it's a fight, and you know it's going to be a struggle throughout your life, and you know there's going to be cracks in it, and you know it's going to get out, and all of a sudden you're going to have to recoil words back into your mouth because I didn't really, but I really meant that. How do we fight differently? I love that James tells us how we do that. I love this. He gives us all the bad news up front, and then he starts to teach us what we do. Verse 6. This is amazing. I love this. Verse 6 says, but he gives more grace. Hey now. Right? But he gives more grace than what I give, than what you give, than what your kids give, than what your other relationships give, than what you give yourself. How many of us fight that battle on a regular basis? The mind's kind of going crazy and you say things about yourself that aren't really true and you don't give yourself any grace, right? But God gives more grace. There's no punctuation in the original Greek, but I wonder about if there's a period here or if there's an exclamation point here. If I was writing this, I'd want the exclamation point. But maybe this is a period. We don't fully know. But we know that war fighting makes us lose our minds, and when we lose our minds, we need more grace. Stephen Carter, in his book, The Thing Behind the Thing, says, it is when I am strong in grace then I can extend it to myself, to a plethora of potholes in my story, and to the person who has unfortunately gotten too close to these old wounds. It's when we see grace and live in it. Grace grows stronger when we believe the truth of John 10:10. If you want really practical ways of understanding grace, go to John 10:10. I have come that you may have life and life to the fullest. That's what Jesus has promised us. And Dallas Willard, one of my favorite authors, one of my favorite guys, right? Dallas Willard says, out of John 10:10 come three amazing truths that he grounded a lot of his ministry on. If you know anything about Dallas Willard out of Dallas Theological and other things, he has mentored and pastored so many pastors along the way. But he says, John 10:10, if we take it seriously, here's the three things we can take out of John 10:10 and we can preach to our hearts when we go to war. Ready? Number one, I have nothing to prove, I have nothing to lose, and I have nothing to hide. Each of these goes against John 10:10. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly, right? If the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, Christ says, I do the opposite. And he says, I have nothing to prove, I have nothing to lose, and I have nothing to hide. Grace reminds me again and again that when I am in Jesus Christ, when I have put my full weight into Jesus, I have nothing to prove. And yet we act like we do on a regular basis, right? We act as if there's a scorecard happening all the time, and yet if Christ and justification is true, we have nothing to prove, we have nothing to lose, and we have nothing to hide. I can think of the last fight I had lately, and it started with the idea of I had something that I was not willing to lose. and it starts off rational, but by the end becomes completely irrational. And the reason behind that fight and every fight is because war always breeds chaos. Out of control, irrational. You ever caught yourself in the middle of a fight going like, what are we fighting about right now? Really? I don't think we ever think that in the middle of the fight because we just want to win. But when we could take a second and step out of the fight and we're like, that's what we're fighting about right now? Man, we've covered that so many times, haven't we? And yet the reality is we come in with the exact opposite of these things, right? I have everything to prove in this fight. I have everything to lose in this fight. And I'm going to hide everything in this fight, right? That's what we do in a fight. We hide our real hearts. We try and win. If I lose, it's going to be losing for life if I give in here, right? And we try to prove ourselves to everybody and anyone around us. But here's the beautiful thing Jesus reminds us of, John 10. You have nothing to prove in me, you have nothing to lose in me, and nothing to hide. And so if you understand that in Jesus Christ we have nothing to prove, nothing to lose, and nothing to hide, it means we are then becoming more like him, and that means we become more humble. And this is where James ends us this morning in the application of this. He starts to name about what humble people look like. He goes, if you want to look at fighting and fighting differently, the only way you fight differently is if you're humble. And if you trust God to be that humility in you. And he says, humble people look like this in verses 7 to 9. Humble people submit. Verse 7 of chapter 4. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. He says, I want you to submit yourself not to the person in the fight, not to your kids. Submit yourself to God first. Call a ceasefire. Put the white flag up. Humble people submit themselves, therefore, to God. Number 2, humble people resist. He says, resist the devil and he will flee from you. James 4:7. Humble people resist. We take ground in war and we can bunker down for the next onslaught. Many of us feel like if we lose our ground, we have to go all the way back. The enemy will remind us again and again. The enemy will remind you that that every battle you fight, you're losing exponentially. You ever feel that? Like I start here, I sin in some way, I mess up, and the enemy tells me I've got to start all the way back here. But in war, that's not true, right? If we've made progress along the way in years of our life, we've made little bunker points along the way, if we lose this battle, we're not retreating back to here. We lose the battle, we're retreating back to here, correct? It's God reminding us, you've made progress. Stay in the progress because the enemy wants to remind you you need to start over. And one of the things James is telling us is resist that in the middle of your fight. Number 3, humble people draw near. I love this. Humble people draw near. In the days of James, this is so amazing. I would not want to be this guy on the battlefield, but in the battlefield times of James, everybody would be given whatever they needed for the war. Some got shields, some got swords, some got horses, and then other guys got banners. Now, I don't want to be the banner guy, okay? Give me something to defend myself that's not a flag, okay? But during the battle, what would happen is that banner was extremely, extremely important. Because in that battle, the army with the guy with the flag, the banner would be the rallying point. So in the middle of chaos, someone would blow a trumpet. Again, I wouldn't want to be the trumpet guy either, like, right? The trumpet guy blows a trumpet, and everyone would look at the banner to rally together. It would be the place everyone would draw near. It unified them back. It brought hope. It realigned the fighting. James says, draw near. In the midst of a war scenario, he says, find the banner and run towards it. That's what he's saying. So in many ways, the guy with the banner was the most crucial part of the war because when war gets chaotic, they needed a rallying point, and the banner would be the place they would all run towards. What James is saying in every single fight, in the middle of that fight, whatever that fight is for you this week, when your brain's going 1,000,000 miles an hour and listing all of the things that you love to drag back up from the past, remember when do you remember that time? And you just like start hurling grenades, right? And you're just like, that got him, right? And then you're waiting for the nuclear button. If I hit that one, the fight's over, right? And you're just itching on the button, and you're like, no, if I say that, I'm going to be sleeping not just downstairs, I'm going to be sleeping 10 miles away, right? I know that if I hit that button, though, it's going to get the reaction, right? In the middle of chaos, God says, hey, remember the rallying point, and the rallying point is the banner. The rallying point is God himself. He says, draw near to God. It's the banner of God. It's that moving towards him. And bonus, as you're running to it, here's the reality. In the battlefield, it wasn't just that people would run to it. Most often, the guy with the banner would be running to the place where they're going to unify. So he's almost running towards you as well. It's this thing of God is running towards you as you're running towards him. Draw near to God, James 4:8. We get this out of James 4:8. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Humble people draw near. Last one, humble people know the damage of war, James 4:9. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and joy to gloom. He doesn't say that as kind of like that was weird. He doesn't say that as like an ongoing, like, hey, just always be that person, always be Eeyore. That's not what he's saying. He's saying in the middle of a fight, know what the damage can do. And if you know what the damage can do, you should be able to see those words of being wretched and mourn and weep. And how often do we think of the damage the war has on us? We always think of that, right? The damage the war does to us, we're pretty quick to remember that. Remember when you hurt me? Do you remember when you said those things about me? But we forget often in the middle of war what the damage is to the person on the other side of the fight. And James says you're to fight differently. Humble people know the damage of war, and so they fight differently. Humble yourself, humble ourselves, community. James 4:10. So therefore, James 4:10, humble yourselves before God, and he will exalt you. Now, all that to say, that's a lot of knowledge. It's a lot of headspace. But let me give you some uncomfortable questions you can ask in any fight. And you don't have to ask these. It's fine. Many of you guys are like, I want to fight you right now. That's fine. It's fine. I get it. But let me give you some practical questions you can ask. And here's the thing. These can be asked before the fight. These can be, you kind of see that brewing. You're kind of like, this is going to be something we're going to need to talk about. And these are also things you could be happening in the fight. But these are things that I think are just some really good, uncomfortable questions to ask in any fight you find yourself with, whether it's teens, whether it's spouse, whether it's friends. Number one, my wife does a great job of this, more than I give her credit for. And she always starts with, can I share something I'm seeing? That's a way different question, isn't it? And the reason that's a way different question is because as a guy, and if my passion at the bottom of me is, do I have what it takes? If she starts off with another way of asking that, what on earth were you thinking, right? That's a different question, isn't it? That caused a little bit of a different kind of heart reaction within me. Let me tell you what I was thinking, right? But when she comes alongside and say, hey, can I share something I'm seeing in you? Can I share something I'm seeing with the kids? Can I share something I'm seeing? Now you're all going to look at the question and be like, nope, you cannot, right? Right? I understand. But what if you were to answer the question, yeah, you can share what you're seeing. It doesn't mean you're always going to have to agree with them. It doesn't mean you're always going to have to say, you're exactly right, that is me. But these are always the best starts of our conversations. We hit hard topics is, can I share something I'm seeing about this? And you can fill me in on the details, but here's what I'm seeing on the outside. That's number one. Number two, what is it about this moment that is so frustrating? And you don't have to ask this out loud, okay? That would be weird to ask in the middle of a fight. You're in the middle of this big argument with somebody. What do you think about this moment is the most frustrating? And they're like, you asking that question is the most frustrating part, right? But what if we ask that of ourselves? What if we ask that of ourselves in the middle of the fight? What is it about this moment that I find so frustrating? And really kind of start to see what is it at the bottom, right? Even if you need to call a timeout, right? Hey, we'll talk about this. I just need a minute, right? If you were to see our house, and if you've been around us at all personally, you know that my wife and I are really quiet fighters. We just process a lot. Others of you are not quiet fighters. Others of you are like, we just let it fly and then we deal with the things afterwards. That's not good or bad. I'm just saying, for us, we process a lot, and so there's a lot of quiet in ours, and they're like, are you guys still mad at each other? Yeah, we're just kind of processing, right? So this is a great question to ask in the middle of the fight. What is in the moment that is so frustrating? Number three, why are you getting so worked up, right? Now, this is a hard one to ask in the middle of a fight. Because why? War is what? Chaos. War is crazy. And I think if you were to ask this question specifically, you'd probably have to ask it about 5 times to get to the real root, right? Because the first time you ask, you're like, you, and this time, and this Pete, that's why I'm getting so worked up, because you didn't listen, right? Whatever. But really, as you start to kind of dial away from the fight, as you start to work yourself back, it's a great question to say, why was I getting so worked up? Here's the question. What was at risk? What was threatened by that fight? My control? My pride? What was it that was at risk? Because when you're in a fight, you're defending something. You don't know what it is often until it's afterwards and it's done, but you're like, whoa, I thought, wow, I didn't know that was in me. Yeah. You get worked up because you're defending something that you hold valuable. So what is it? And then you really want the last one, the last unfair question to ask in any fight. This is so unfair. I'm telling you, I bust this out, not all the time, okay? Last question, if you really want to just make the fight uncomfortable, ask this last one. You want a quick no. Nope. Why not? Because God doesn't need to be in this fight because I want to win. Can I just tell you, we're friends here. Can I just tell you how little I can often ask that question? Even before I have a conversation I know is going to be tough. Even in the middle of the fight, I need to ask that question more if I'm going to fight differently. If you know a hard conversation's coming, let me tell you, there is nothing more diffusing than saying, hey, can we pray about this before we get into it? I want to hear everything, and I don't think we shouldn't shut things off, but can we just pray before we get into this? And I'm telling you, it's still a fight. Okay, please don't hear me. It's like, Christian, once you pray, it's all good. Everybody's fine. Everybody just leaves, well, I forgive you, you forgive me, everything's great. Okay? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying God becomes part of your fight. God becomes part of the rallying point. We rally to him, and when we rally to him, he draws near to us. Humble people ask these questions. Humble people ask these questions, and they ask the last one a lot. Can we pray about this? Can we talk to God about this? And I'm going to encourage you. When we talk about living differently, this is one of the ones that keeps coming up again and again. And so if you need help in this fight and you feel like, man, Joel, you don't understand, there's been a lot of that lately in our house. There's been a lot of that lately in our relationship. There's been a lot of that lately in this season of life that we're in. If you need to talk, my door is always open for that. But specifically, are you asking uncomfortable questions of one another, or do we just kind of exist on our own and hope that the war doesn't break out anytime soon? I hope that we get really good at fighting. I hope that we're really good at this stuff, because it starts to kind of unearth some things that are in us that we don't really know how to get out, and fighting can be a really good thing to unearth those things out of us. But if we have to fight, we fight the way Christ told us to, and that's with humility and to honor one another and to run to God as he draws near to us. Let me pray for you, pray for me this week, and I'll close. God, we only get so much time on a Sunday morning. And we can rush back out and we can get back into whatever our calendar tells us is next. Or, God, we can take just a minute or two here and just ask your Holy Spirit to speak to us. And so I want to do that. Would you take time and just ask him, what passions are at the bottom of my heart? What do I keep fighting over? What do I keep wanting more than anything else? Ask him to bring that up. Ask him to reveal what that is. God, I thank you for being faithful. I thank you for grace. But you give more grace. So as we identify what is that thing at the bottom that we keep fighting over, would we remind ourselves that grace covers it and that we need to talk about it? We don't just need to bury it and, okay, I'm just going to deal with that on my own. But God, I pray that you would give courage to those in this room this morning. I feel like there may be those in this room this morning that need to have that conversation this week. They need to figure out a time to battle that out and talk openly about it. And so I pray that that would be true. Give them the courage and boldness, and would you walk beside them every single step of the way. Father, thank you for calling us to live differently. Thanks for giving us hope in the midst of a heart that can often run behind lines of the enemy. God, thank you so much for the summer ahead of us. And I pray that this summer is one of joy and contentment and goodness and the best relationships we can have. And so I pray that you would go ahead of us in that. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. We appreciate it. We hope to see you next week. Have a great Sunday.